Tulo te mamalu o te whale, toku ingoa ko Naomi Maheu, toku whale ko Mangatai, toku wheitu ko Tonga, toku whenua ko Nanumanga, toku atu whenua ko Tuvalu. Greetings and a warm Pacifica welcome to you all, joining from this room as well as those streaming through our online platform. My name is Naomi Maheu. I am from the Mangatai clan, the village of Tonga on Nanumanga Island in Tuvalu. And it is an absolute honor to host this very first session of the conference, a topic that is closer to home, people-centered climate action, COP31. I am an Australian Awards Scholarship awardee pursuing a Master of National Security Policy, and I also serve as the servant leader of the ANU Pacifica Students Association. Back home, I work in the Department of Foreign Affairs with background in medical laboratory. In Tuvalu, weaving means langa or lalanga, to create something like this fan. Or we call it tio, to create a beautiful fan like this. I grew up watching my grandma, Toetu Mami, who turned Fuavalu Malima, 85 years old yesterday. I grew up watching her weaving. She would weave alungalanga, a local pillow. She would reweave a torn mat, a tapola, a big basket, a ningi, a plate, or a peka, a small basket. But from all these years of observations and practical, I think she would confirm my weaving to a certificate of participation. So ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our panel convener, and our panel convener will introduce the panelists. So our panel convener is Salā Dr. George Carter. Dr. George Carter is the interim head of the Department of Pacific Affairs at the ANU, director of the ANU Pacific Institute, and cluster lead on climate security and Indigenous and traditional knowledge at the ANU Institute for Climate Change, Energy and Disaster. He is a leading expert with the UN Independent Expert Group on the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. George's research examines the intersection of international politics and security with climate change, focusing on diplomacy, finance, gender, democracy, and knowledge, and the power and authority of Pacific states and small islands developing states. His work contributes to climate politics, foreign policy, multilateralism, oceanic diplomacy, Pacific regionalism, geopolitics, and Indigenous philosophy and Pacific aerospace politics. He teaches and supervises across international relations, security, development, and Pacific studies, and delivers executive education for diplomatic, defense, and public institutions. Grounded in the principle of Tauzua service, his work supports Pacific communities, regional organizations, and climate and ocean negotiations. George is from Samoa, holds the chiefly title of Salā, and draws on his Samoan, Tuvaluan, Kiribati, Chinese, and British heritage. Whawhtailahi, Salā.
You're supposed to just say my name.
All of the above.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And weaving our stories. Last Friday, I had the privilege to sit with and join Naomi and Aulanga and the group of culture keepers as they conduct their advocacy working with Pacific youth here in Canberra. But that story is also interwoven to Naomi's work when we met in Dubai in COP, now I'm forgetting, 27, when she was leading in the presentation of the model from SPC of Funafuti and the various different phases of 1.5, 2 degrees and what it would look like. And that's the story of this panel here. Our panel represents voices from the Pacific and of course across Australia who are ever so present in the Conference of the Parties. We've sat in so many different side events and joined in various different advocacy when there is the voices from not only our communities, from where we come from in terms of the science and the research, but also in the work of policymakers from not only governments through ministries, but also regional organizations. We are at that other forefront inside these meetings at the global stage. And I thought we do this year in, year out at the Australia Pavilion, at the Moana Pavilion, at the IMO Pavilion, and all these pavilions. But I don't think our communities, such as this room in here, have heard these voices, these messages, because they are also in faraway places. So that's the root of where it is, because one of the concepts that is brought forth by many of our leaders, but also our community advocates who come to Conference of the Parties is people-centered development. So that's the title, but basically here we want to talk about COP, the work of, in the research we undertake in terms of climate diplomacy, the work of the Australian government, regional organizations, communities, as well as our non-governmental organizations and their network. So I'm going to introduce one by one. They will introduce themselves and also the work before first round of questions. So Barbara Ubuai, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. You've traveled all the way from Torres Strait through Cairns, and of course you along with Auntie Rose, we have a very close relationship in the many different panels, but you brought forth the voice of Torres Strait, but also Aboriginal, Indigenous, in terms of your work, not only here, but the advocacy. Please tell us about your work and what's been happening.
Thank you so much. Kapgoiga Morang Uznel Barbara, Ngai Saibai Lag, Ngai Gudamalu Lag, Nguzu Lag Zenadkes. I'm from the front line. I left my job recently to return back to the islands, a place which is completely waterlocked. We are a mini version of the Pacific here in Australia. In fact, we claim and we're very proud to have very strong Pacific connections. We merge with Papua New Guinea, Melanesia to the north, and Aboriginal Australia to the south. And in fact, the Torres Strait itself proudly has Aboriginal islands in the south of Greater Torres Strait, and obviously very close connections to Papua New Guinea through our islands in the north. Half of our language from the Western Islands is based on the Aboriginal tongue. I'm a proud speaker of my own mother tongue from the Western Islands, Kalakaua. And from the Eastern Torres Strait, their language base, I'm told by linguists, originates in Papua New Guinea. So you can see this is a very, very unique, rich, cultural space. It's only tiny, probably about 46 or so thousand kilometres of sea country with tiny islands spread across it. In comparison to the Pacific, you may say it is tiny, but imagine being on a little island, for example, such as mine, Saibai, which is right up in the top west, merely 1 metre above sea level. And scientific data tells my people that we have less than a few decades of livability left in that part of the world. So where I come in, thank you, George, is as a community member, as a proud Saibai Lag, as a proud person of Torres Strait, born and raised, returning home to see what I can do, just as a person. I loved the distinguished guest this morning, Her Excellency, and her her opening address, and a lot resonated completely because, salt water in the veins connects all of us. The truths that she spoke, the aspirations that she reflected on and projected into the future speak for her people and also speak for mine because we come from that same body of water. And I think that's how we need to look at the Torres Strait. We're an Australian story, but we are a Pacific story. If I could just read a little bit, please do pull me up when you need me to stop, because I'm Melanesian, so I can talk until tomorrow. So I need a bell. So just a little bit of background for the Torres Strait communities, including my island. Climate change is no longer a future risk. It's a present and accelerating threat to land, housing our food systems, cultural sites, and community continuity. Saibai Island and many islands in the Torres Strait are extremely low-lying, and its highest elevation is approximately 1.7 metres above sea level and is already experiencing regular tidal inundation and flooding. This placed the community among the most climate-exposed population in Australia. In fact, we will be potentially the first domestic refugees Australia will see. The issue is not simply environmental degradation, it's continuity risk. The risk that a people may be dispatched or displaced from country, with profound implications for culture, law, identity, and intergenerational knowledge transmission. This reality has already been recognised internationally. In 2022, the United Nations Human Rights Committee found that Australia had violated the rights of Torres Strait Islanders by failing to take adequate action to protect them from climate change impacts affecting their homes, culture, and family life. The situation is therefore not only a policy issue, but a matter of legal obligation, cultural survival, and international accountability. So where does oceanic diplomacy sit? Well, it's a living practice. Conventional approaches to diplomacy remain state-centric, positioning diplomacy as the domain of governments, ministers, and formal international institutions. However, this framing is historically incorrect because we've always talked, negotiated, shared, collaborated. As articulated in the esteemed paper, Oceanic Diplomacy, Reasserting Indigenous Pathways Through Contemporary Pacific, diplomacy in Oceania has existed for hundreds and thousands of years prior to the modern state, and we in the Torres Strait have been very much a part of that. We've conducted through kinship systems, exchange networks, inter-island alliances, and negotiate relationships across land and sea. We have a huge population from the Pacific who have intermarried, have connected, not only in modern times, but throughout history as well. We pretty much have the Pacific in the Torres Strait right now. Oceanic, I can come back, there's a bit more to go, but pretty much I've just founded this community organisation looking at community projects in relation to adaptation and resilience, and also international and national advocacy, as you mentioned, and pretty much, trying to be very present in that space. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I'm now going to introduce Philomena Nelson and in her work from the Secretariat Pacific Regional Environmental Program as the climate change advisor, not only in terms of, maybe if you could reintroduce SPRIP and the work in terms of the climate change pillar of work that is undertaken but also how that's connected to COP, not COP31, but COP. Thank you.
Whaptaitele Salā, tai au manuia, whaatalo whaatu le anganga whaaloalo I paia male malu. O mai ona pai lango ia paia o tai au le taitai o le tātou por kalame ia mai se fo I le sa whaapito I whionga whia me nā ui mta wha. Ai o le tātou talanoa ia le ngangana asiosi. Tulolo sua Salā. Talo whalawain, good morning. My name is Philomena Nelson. My my tai tairo is Muliangatele from the village of Leauva'a in Upolu in Samoa, for those of you who have visited our beautiful country. And I also hold another title in one of my villages. And we've just had a conversation this morning talking about our villages and where we're from. And I think you've heard this morning about the importance of our identity from the opening, the welcome to country, to the keynote addresses that were provided by our guest speaker. So even though I'm here representing our organization that Salā have alluded to, the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment, it's an intergovernmental organization. It's owned by all the Pacific Island countries and territories, including New Zealand and Australia. And the work that we do, we focus on the environment, the natural environment, but also climate change or building climate change resilience across the region. Part of our work is to support the national meteorological and hydrological services in strengthening the capacity, the technology, the observation systems, so that we can support our countries in building end-to-end early warning systems, not only at the national level, but also in communities, in outer islands, knowing that a lot of our Pacific countries, including Tuvalu, for example, the outer islands are so dispersed and not very close to the centers where all the key services are being provided from. The work of the program, which is called Climate Change Resilience Program, we provide technical and policy support to the 14 Pacific independent states that are parties to the UNFCCC, established under the United Nations, or UNFCCC, as you've heard it. And so the work that we do, and for COP31, and I know Ambassador next to me will speak to that, but we provide that support to ensure that our Pacific delegations have a voice in those international conversations, because our delegations are so small. You're lucky if you have more than 10 people or even 5. I recall that last year, I think the government of Samoa only had about 3 or 4 people. There's the agenda for COP every year. It's huge. You imagine 2 weeks sitting in the rooms negotiating on some of these key elements of these agreements, so that to ensure that the concerns of small island states like in the Pacific, like the Torres Strait, for example, are heard, because this is where the decisions are made, right, about climate change. So that's the work we do. I look after, I hate that word, I look after, but I have to say it. I actually lead a team of people supporting Pacific Island countries and territories in addressing or looking at solutions or actions to enable countries and communities to adapt to the impacts of climate change. But I also provide support in the area of climate-induced loss and damage that was referenced in the remarks of the head of school, for example, about climate-induced loss and damage, which is very much associated with loss of land, loss of language, loss of identity. And I can speak more about that during this session. Thank you, Salā.
Thank you, Faftai. Ambassador, I'm gonna, so we'll come back there as the last speaker, but Kisaya Mbamba, who with WWF here in Canberra, is also the head of the COP strategy team, and has been really facilitating and bringing so many diverse voices, not only here in Canberra when we come together to Parliament and progress or push on advocacy on greater attention to towards Pacific, but also when we also gather in Belém or gather in Dubai. It's also bringing together both Australia and Pacific NGOs and local communities together. Please, Kisaya, if you could explain to the gathering your work.
Vinaka George. Yes, I'm Kesai Mbamba, and I am the Senior Manager for COP31 at WWF Australia. And a recent opportunity where I introduced myself like that was in COP30 in Brazil last year, and it was on the night that we found out that Australia would not be hosting COP31, and that it would be hosted by Turkey with a pre-COP in the Pacific, and Australia would be the president of negotiations. I went to a kava session at the Moana Pavilion and sat down with some of the Fiji delegation, and I said to the woman next to me, I'm the senior manager for COP31 at WWF Australia, and she burst out laughing. And she put her hand on the lady next to her, who was actually the head of the climate change ministry in Fiji, and she goes, she's the head of COP31 at WWF Australia. It was laughing and laughing. Thankfully, I have managed to keep my job, and I am still the senior manager for COP31 because it still is a really important role that Australia has as president of negotiations, and the Pacific has in working with Australia and hosting the pre-COP in Fiji and Tuvalu. And how WWF kind of came to be involved in this was that we, as an organization, an international network of organizations, and as an NGO here in Australia, have the privilege to work across many sectors. So climate sector, the conservation sector, and also community and international development. And we also really have the privilege to work with and alongside many communities and Indigenous peoples across Australia and the Pacific. And it really became kind of Uncle Paul this morning kind of mentioned that respect is taking responsibility. So it was our responsibility to kind of try and bring, connect the different sectors. If Australia was going to host COP31, then we needed to have these sectors all working together to identify the opportunities there and work together. So WWF has kind of been doing some work in that area, but my personal connection goes back longer when my father was at the Rio Convention. He was part of one of the first Indigenous delegations to a UN conference, and the Rio conference is what gave birth to the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change, to the Convention on Biodiversity, and the Desertification Convention as well. So 3 really important things on looking after country. And so that is kind of I can like to think I'm continuing the work of my father, my ancestors. Dad's from Lakemba in the eastern part of Fiji. My mum is Australian of Celtic heritage, and so it's really a privilege for me to be doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kisaya. And Ambassador Will, please, if you could introduce yourself. I think this is, I hope it's not the first time that ANU has met you in terms of, yes, so thank you. It's a privilege for you to be, for us to have you here. But also, before we move on to COP31, if you could just introduce in terms of the work this year of the department.
Sure. Well, thanks, Salā. Dr. George, it's really great to be here with my fellow panelists. Yes, I'm Will Nankervis, and my job is Ambassador for Climate Change. And that means I'm really sort of responsible or lead climate diplomacy for Australia. So what's climate diplomacy? What does that mean? Well, I really think of it in 2 ways. First, it's working with partners, international partners, to drive climate ambition globally. So Pacific partners are obviously central to that, but how we work with partners internationally to ratchet up the levels of climate ambition and really drive climate action. And then the second part of that is using our climate action and our partnerships on climate to deepen our relationships with partners. So that's how I kind of see climate diplomacy and my role. And a big part of that this year is of course COP31. Now I'm on this panel mainly to listen, mainly to hear what my fellow panelists have to say and sort of incorporate that in how we prepare for COP31 and how we take forward our partnership. But what I can do is talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with COP31, how we try to incorporate or will try to incorporate community voices and community-centred action in the way we take the partnership with the Pacific on COP31 forward. But I think my key message is that we're very keen to do that. You know, we've got some sort of ideas and some established mechanisms. The Pacific Partnership is very well established. We've got good governance mechanisms and had a great Talanoa, the fourth Talanoa with the Pacific Climate Ministers a few weeks ago in Brisbane. But I think what this panel about in lots of ways is community voices and how community voices can be amplified and can feed into what we're trying to do as part of that Pacific Partnership with COP31 this year. So I can talk more about what we're up to, but really more interested in listening, George. Thank you.
And on that note, I'd like to focus on COP31 because there is sort of, I think, demystifying what is happening this year. A lot of, there's been a lot of processes in different spaces. And of course, we're coming up towards Bonn very soon, as well as the pre-COP, and then of course, COP31. So this is the question for COP31. And maybe, Ambassador, if we can start with you, if you can sort of inform us where, what is happening and what's next, so that we also have a clear vision and know where we're going to next and how these voices contribute to this process.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think, Kessia, you sort of went through what happened at the end of the year last year where we landed on COP31. So the outcome is that Turkey will be the president of COP31, COP president, and COP, including a World Leaders Summit, will take place in Antalya at the end of the year this year. But Australia will indeed be president of negotiations. So our Climate Minister, Chris Bowen, will preside over the negotiations. And that's a really unique opportunity to shape those negotiations. And the Pacific Partnership is going to be a key sort of mechanism through which Pacific voices feed into those negotiations. And then there will be a pre-COP meeting, and this is really important and in lots of ways a really key focus of what we'll be doing. And we now know that pre-COP meeting will happen in Fiji, in Fiji from the 5th to the 8th of October, with a leaders component in Tuvalu. And that leaders component in Tuvalu is really important because it will bring the eyes of the world, the attention of the world to the impacts of climate change on a small atoll state. And I want to acknowledge the High Commissioner of Tuvalu who's sitting here. But it will show climate impacts, but it will also show Pacific resilience, Pacific solutions, and expose the world to Pacific responses and Pacific ways of thinking about and coming up with solutions to climate change. So that's really important. And that pre-COP, as I mentioned, is a kind of a huge focus for us at the moment. The whole initiative undertaking around COP31 was born of the desire to profile the impacts of climate change on vulnerable small island states, and also profile, as I mentioned, Pacific solutions, Pacific wisdom, and Pacific climate leadership. because the Pacific has, for a long time, been a voice of clarity on climate change and a voice of wisdom and a highly respected internationally voice on climate change. But we have the opportunity this year to amplify that voice further, to give it a sort of particular prominence through the President of Negotiations role and through hosting of the pre-COP and through to what we want to achieve at COP31. The last thing I'll say, George, is just that the mechanism, the Pacific Partnership for COP31 is really well established. So there are various levels of that partnership. There's a Pacific Senior Officials Task Force that meets regularly, and Pacific Climate Ministers Talanoa. As I mentioned, the third meeting happened a few weeks ago in Brisbane, but we've also worked through other Pacific regional processes. So, for example, Pacific Foreign Ministers, Pacific leaders through the Pacific Island Forum issued statements of support and so on for COP31, and we expect to continue working through the regional architecture as well as those specialised mechanisms to take forward what we're doing.
Thank you very much, Will. I'd like to turn to Vilmena, continuing on that sort of explanation of what's happening and the road ahead. And you're participating from SPRIP, and as you mentioned, the role through one crop in that governance arrangement. What can you inform us about the priorities coming through from the Pacific as part of the COP31 from governments, but also regional organizations? What's that, what can you tell us about what's coming through for this year's work?
Thank you, Salā, for that question. And I think probably the ambassador can also speak to that later on the themes that has been endorsed by the climate change ministers meeting held in Brisbane last month. But that's separate from the Pacific SID's negotiation priorities. Every year they identify the thematic priorities that they set where they have common Pacific positions on 13 priority areas. And that includes climate finance, for example, mitigation, for example, adaptation, addressing loss and damage, capacity building and technology, agriculture, for example, gender and social inclusion. These are the key ones. And Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, on carbon trading, okay, and ocean. Ocean is one of the key thematic priority. Of course, I've already mentioned gender, George. These are, every year we go to COP, the preparation of Pacific SIDS focus on those 13 thematic areas. But everything is anchored on keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement within reach. That's so important to Pacific, to small island states, because we're so tiny. We're so tiny, we only have so much land mass. And if we lose all of that, we lose who we are, for example. And I heard it this morning, it's been mentioned. Our identity and our language, everything, our traditions, everything is attached to our land and our ocean. And if we lose that, we lose everything. So everything is anchored on that 1.5. We need to ensure that's kept within reach. I know that the science is saying that the impacts are faster than what's being projected, right? If there are any climate scientists in the room, right? It's faster. What we are living through is much faster than what was projected back then. So all those themes are anchored on that. And also 1.5 is one of the key thematic area that has been endorsed by the climate change ministers. Throughout the year, there is a process of engagement, of discussions, of Talanoa with Pacific negotiators from the 14 Pacific SIDS to prepare for the next COP. And it's the same process that we are also doing this year. And part of our work is also to support and work with the Foreign Secretariat and the Government of Australia to prepare for the negotiations at COP31. This year is so important. Even though Australia did not get that presidency, there's a huge win, right? Australia being the president for negotiation. And that's so important, right? That's so important because we've been trying over the years to push for more ambitious reductions to fossil fuel, but nothing has been agreed on that mitigation work program, for example. So having Australia as the precedent for negotiations is so critical. It's so important to the Pacific region, to our small island states, to ensure that the big emitters, the big countries can look into ways to reduce the use of fossil fuels substantively, right?
Thank you very much, Minna. And Kesaya, you know, the work of WWF in terms of not only the galvanizing the support and momentum from here in Australia, but globally as well. What can you tell us in the work, NGOs, and it's also leading up to COP31?
I think one of the benefits of being an international organization is that we can work across the different modes or regions that that COPs go through. And so one thing that we've been thinking about for the past 2 years, we could see that it was hopefully going to be Australia and the Pacific, following on from Brazil, so from Brazil to Australia and the Pacific, and then on to an African nation. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about is how to connect the COPs rather than to think of them as one by one, but that just linking them through with themes. And I think the Brazilian presidency did very important work in the last year plus to really think about what's a 5-year plan for the action agenda, for example. So the action agenda being everything around the everything outside of the negotiations at COP, and so making a plan for that. And so we've been working with our colleagues in WWF Brazil, in WWF Africa, and now very closely with our colleagues in WWF Turkey, who also convene a network of civil society organizations in Turkey to kind of draw those threads together and to find out where are our joint areas. Definitely sort of addressing one of the core issues of climate change, the emission of fossil fuels, is really key to that. So keeping 1.5 degrees in mind. And of course, working with our colleagues in WWF Pacific and other partners too. So that's been sort of a key thing, and certainly the climate network in Turkey has mobilized so very fast. They've really hit the ground running with the priorities they want to see from their government, with what they want to see from COP31 is very clear. And I think the climate network here in Australia is thinking, okay, with this role of president of negotiations, we must think about what we want for the whole world. Like, okay, what could Australia do domestically and for the region, but also what can Australia achieve now for the world through these negotiations this year? And as normally the president of the COP is actually the president for the year after. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well, is that the incoming president does a lot of preparation to prepare for the negotiations, and then they get the presidency at the COP and they hold it for the following year. So there's a lot of important work that continues on for the year after our COP as well. So a lot of really important things there. And then one of the things that we've done here in the region is to work with WWF Pacific and WWF Aotearoa New Zealand to work with the communities that we work with on conservation projects, because we saw that there was a real need to connect the environmental and sort of nature aspect of the work with climate change. And so we've began sort of a program called Oceania First Voices, which brings Indigenous people from Australia, the Pacific and Aotearoa to come together and to sort of to identify what are the aspirations or desires of our partners to take their knowledge and their expertise to something like a COP, and if they don't want to go to the COP, what would they like us to take to the COP? So Oceania First Voices has been kind of an amazing gathering of people from people who do right-way fire in the Kimberley, to bat conservation and turtle conservation in Fiji, to the women who work with sea grapes in Solomon Islands, coming together to share knowledge, to create these key messages, and then to find people from those communities who can go to COP and share that knowledge and expertise as well. So that's been, I guess, you know, in the theme of this conference, in a way it's kind of participatory action research to bring that together as well. So yeah, a lot of really amazing people doing incredible things across the world and in our region.
Thank you very much, Kisaya. And Barbara, you know, we sort of had this conversation earlier that this special moment in terms of COP and COP31 has also been fuel for your local community in terms of bringing together in your group and your work and connecting it to other groups, and also connecting your voices globally. What is the mission for COP31 from your community? What is the what are you hoping not only to achieve but to continue on in the coming years?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, George. The Pacific and the Torres Strait are both leading. We're known globally to be leading in our climate voices. So we're all already very present. And I applaud the Australian government on the position that we're going into as negotiators, and would love to, as we're emerging in this organisation, trying to consolidate the views and thoughts and aspirations of the Torres Strait people given the crisis. I would love to have dialogue to see what we might be able to work together on and collaborate. This is like I mentioned earlier, this is international diplomacy. We're particularly proud of being Australian. The Torres Strait has served Australia in many ways, including throughout World War II. We're an important buffer to the biosecurity of Australia from the northern spaces that we share. We're part of a huge backbone in the mining sector, building railway systems and stuff throughout Australia. Big presence. From a tiny space, very big presence. My grandfather fought under the Australian flag prior to 1967, very proudly. His feet were a little bit, like his toes were a little bit deformed because he got issued a pair of boots that he did not, like that was the best thing he could get, and he wore them regardless of what size they were throughout his time in the service in the Torres Strait, so under that flag. I would love to see us go into COP31 together. I'd love to go in and say, and give thought and have dialogue about what structural changes we might put in place to support the aspirations of the Torres Strait in amongst the Pacific Collective. These are thoughts, these are introductory thoughts. What we pride ourselves on in the Pacific is this thing about talanoa and respect and responsibility and obligation. We always talk about, one person can't get anything done alone. We have to work together. So I guess that's the message that I want to impress. I think it's time the Torres Strait participated in regional settings and would love to be at pre-COP before we go across and start that conversation. We have to take these first steps. We are using our agency, we want to collaborate, and partnerships are important to us. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open up, this is an opportunity for the academic community to also engage in this conversation. That is the reason why we brought to have this panel here. But I also would like to return to Ambassador, if you could inform us on the 4 areas that were prioritized by Pacific governments. It's important that we must be informed. To support the endeavors of this year, we need to be informed and be well aware of where the priority is. I mean, it's such a big area that we need to work in, but we also need to have a focused and targeted approach to have effective outcomes that come out of COP31. So, Ambassador, and then we'll open up to questions for the panel.
Thanks, George. So I think Philomena's covered it in many ways, but as I mentioned, the climate ministers Talanoa a couple of weeks ago in Brisbane agreed on 4 key priorities. The first one is keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. So as Philomena mentioned, the importance of that goal. And this is really about mitigation outcomes. So supporting global efforts to keep that goal within reach through meaningful mitigation outcomes. And I think, there are many areas of focus for mitigation work, but I think in the current global context, the clean energy transition is going to be a sort of particular focus, including looking at the clean energy transition across the Pacific. The second one, Pillar 2, is about enhancing access to finance. So a really important priority globally. There'll be, as part of the agreement that we have with Turkey, there will be a special session on the financing needs of small island developing states, which will happen in Antalya, which will provide a platform for capitalisation of the Pacific Resilience Facility. George, I know you've done a lot of work and are doing a lot of outreach on the Pacific Resilience Facility. This is a key focus for Australia and our partners. We have a real opportunity for that capitalisation and to make the case that the Pacific Resilience Facility fills a particular gap. The Pacific has long struggled to access finance from some of the big facilities. They're doing some great work, but there's a gap for real community-driven, community-level finance and support for community-level projects that the PRF fills. So the PRF is Pacific-owned, Pacific-led, Pacific-designed, Pacific-driven. It's been fantastic to see the PRF become a reality with the treaty that was signed by leaders in Honiara last year. We have an ambitious capitalisation goal. So the pre-COP in Fiji and Tuvalu, and then COP31 and that special session, we hope will be a real moment for capitalisation of the Pacific Resilience Facility. Pillar 3 is about elevating the ocean climate nexus. This is the ocean theme. So recognising the importance of ocean-based climate action and science and opportunities for sustainable ocean management. So including conservation and resilience and the blue economy. And the 4th pillar, it's sort of cross-cutting, but amplifying Pacific leadership and voices. As I mentioned, this was the key sort of driver behind the COP31 bid from Australia's perspective in the first place. Pacific voices are already listened to very carefully, already super powerful in the international context. But as I mentioned, we have a particular opportunity this year in terms of amplifying Pacific voices. So it's kind of cross-cutting, but that's the fourth pillar. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So we'll now hand over any questions from the crowd. So we have one here from Mark. Maybe we can have 2 or 3, and then we come back to the panel. Okay, so we have Mark, Nick, and sorry, I can't see your name, but 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you run all the way here.
And please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, not sure what the time is. My name is Mark Shaw. I'm a postgraduate student here at the ANU, working on my thesis actually on the Pacific. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts so far this morning. My question is a combination kind of for Philomena and for the ambassador, but welcome any thoughts. The opportunity to have pre-COP in the Pacific and having it, delegates from around the world see firsthand the impacts on small island nations. I'm thinking specifically Tuvalu, and talking about some of the impacts to our own islands in the Torres Strait closer to home is a great opportunity. With the 1.5 heating ambition, put in contrast and the context of growing energy needs, the transition and kind of insatiable use of AI, can you share some of your thoughts on how you're, one, for Philomena, kind of preparing delegates to be able to talk about this, and Will, maybe from your perspective as kind of the Australian ambassador, how are we going to make the most of this opportunity so that it doesn't just become a, oh, well, you know, we can just migrate Tuvaluans or Torres Strait Islander people elsewhere because, oh, the benefits of just doing business as usual outweigh the cost to people.
Thank you. And we have a question. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you to the panel for all of these insights today. My name's Liam. I'm a student here at ANU, studying Bachelor of Asia Pacific Affairs. So my question is, given previous criticism of COP last year with COP30, there wasn't that final agreement on phasing out fossil fuels, as well as just Pacific Islands countries having criticism of Australia's climate action, such as the Northwest Shelf Gas Project, so continuing to open new mines and gas projects. What are the sort of Pacific Island countries' expectations of Australia being president of negotiations, and what are sort of their expectations that Australia's presidency will bring to COP?
Thank you. Thank you for that important question. And we have Nick McLean. Nick, thank you.
I am so sorry.
Thank you. My name's Nick McClellan. I'm a correspondent for Islands Business Magazine. I wonder if Philomena or Ambassador Nankervis, you could comment on the current implications of the war and energy prices and so on. I was at a round table a fortnight ago in Fiji about the way in which countries are diverting development aid towards military spending, the focus on debt burdens for small island states coming out of this long economic blow. Whatever happens in Iran, there's enormous economic implications, food security implications and so on. And I wonder how that's figuring, you know, in your planning for COP31 and the pre-COP particularly, where the world's looking as if there's not going to be a lot of money for the PRF. Can you comment on how you see that and how that factors into your planning at this stage?
Thank you very much. We want to start? Yeah.
That's a lot of questions. A very difficult question. They might sound simple, but they're very difficult. The questions around, and hopefully this will cover some of your, respond to some of the questions that you've asked. The implications of, of what's going on, because all of these things are interlinked, for example, yeah? I think it's important, you know, as an islander, being working at the regional level and actually going to Tuvalu and being there, seeing the impacts of climate change on Tuvalu, even though I've only been to Funafuti, but I also provide support to enable people to go out to the other outer islands, or the other eight islands of Tuvalu. And it's difficult. It's difficult to get out there. It's a huge challenge, even though I'm not Tuvaluan, but I can see it. Being on the ground in Tuvalu is so critical for people who have never been to our region. You know, I develop proposals on behalf of Pacific countries to access finance from the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, or the Adaptation Fund, right? And the problem that we continue to face are the reviewers who review these proposals. They have never been to the Pacific. They have no idea what the challenges are. When we put aside budget on the proposals to fund the cost of chartering a boat to go to the islands, they would say, oh, why are you allocating thousands of dollars to this? We have to explain ourselves. And yet these funds, they were set up to support the most vulnerable countries, the small island states, the least developed countries, including from the Pacific. Right? So, it's not as simple as it seems. Yes, we have the Climate Fund, we have GCF, AF, but it's not simple. Right? There's always been a problem in the I guess, slow to access finance, the base that we needed to access climate finance, and the scale of the funding. We're not there yet. And one of the reasons is because people don't understand context. They have never been there. They do not understand. They've never lived that kind of life. And bringing this into the region, spotlighting our region, even though Australia is president of negotiations, hosting the pre-COP in Fiji and the meeting, the elements of the leader segment in Tuvalu will hopefully bring attention to the people who are, I guess, dragging their feet in listening, in really listening to what we're trying to say every year at COP. That's one of the key things. You've asked a question around, and I think you're referring to the decisions from COP30 about the mitigation work program. Do you know how long it took? I think it was, if I can recall, it was around, what was after Glasgow? Sham. That's when the mitigation work program was, you know, brought to the negotiations. Up to now, hasn't been endorsed. Yeah, and it's a challenge for small island states to be in the room and negotiate. And so, what we do as a regional organization, we bring the Pacific negotiators to talk with New Zealand and Australia and the UK, you know, the European countries, and even the US before they withdrew from the Paris Agreement, to make sure that they understand where we're coming from, right? Because our delegations are so small. You know, we have the Caribbean that we work with as small island states, and also sits in the Indian Ocean, but it's not sufficient. We have to talk to the big countries so that they can look at ways to support small island states like the Pacific Island countries in the negotiation to ensure our concerns are at least considered, even if it's compromised, you know, but it's there. It's right there in front of the conversations in the negotiations. And I think, you know, the question from Nick, the implications of the war, there's a lot of implications, not just on the day-to-day life in the islands, because the bulk of goods are from outside of our region. And I think that's why our Pacific Island countries need to go back to agriculture. We need to make sure that we're focusing on that, what we did during COVID. Everything was shut down. It was so difficult to get rice. And I know that for Kiribati, there was a state of emergency that was declared because of the shortage of rice on the islands. And it's a real thing, because for Kiribati, for example, there's not a lot of land to grow any crop. There's the issue of salinization. You cannot grow anything. Live and Learn in Tuvalu is doing this project where they've got food cubes and concrete, cubes where they grow the pulaka. Pulaka plays a key role in Tuvaluan tradition, for example. And so we had to ensure that we think about the implications of what's going on, and also the implications of the war on the outcomes of COP31, because the geopolitics that is going around, not just the war but other areas, will of course have an impact on the outcomes of every COP, not just this year, even last year, and the future.
Well said. Well, I think Philomena has said it really well in terms of the opportunity that the pre-COP, the leaders component in Tuvalu and pre-COP in Fiji presents in terms of impetus and trying to revive and increase ambition in terms of global mitigation outcomes. Because it's an opportunity to bring the eyes of the world to see firsthand climate impacts, how it's impacting communities, to be there on the ground, to see the Tuvalu TCAP coastal adaptation program, what's happening there, the responses that Tuvalu has to be making and is making. So we really hope that first-hand, on-the-ground experience will help spark ambition, revive and spark ambition in terms of global mitigation outcomes. And we're working very closely with Tuvalu, with Fiji, with all our Pacific partners on that objective, and to design the program and the declaration that will probably come from it to really highlight those issues and the need for global action. And as Philomena said, this is an issue that no one country can deal with alone. We really need global action. We need action from the major emitters. That's going to be vital. So again, a unique opportunity there. One of the things, so in addition to working with partners on the pre-COP and profiling Pacific voices on these issues, one of the key things that Australia can do is highlight our own transition. So Australia has one of the most ambitious globally nationally determined contributions. And we can be sort of telling that story, including as a story of opportunity, a story of economic opportunity, the economic opportunity that comes from the energy transition. Australia can tell a story of a highly fossil fuel dependent economy that has very ambitious plans for transition and that's putting those plans into practice. So our NDC is underpinned by very robust planning, and we can just look at the way renewables have come up in our energy sector. The story of Australian homes, 1 in 3 Australian homes with solar panels, and the big drive on batteries and so on in homes. So lots of good news stories there of an economy that is sort of taking action, and the example that can show in terms of ambition. In terms of the implications of the conflict in the Middle East, as Philomena said, very, very complex. I think countries around the world are grappling with those. It will play out in different ways, but I think one thing that we can expect is a really big focus on energy security and the importance of the energy transition in that context. But also, as Philomena said, on food security. And then finally, just on climate finance and the question about the PRF and the challenges there. I mean, I think absolutely there are lots of competing priorities at the moment. I'm pleased to say that Australia, in terms of climate finance, has a good story to tell. In the last 5 years, we provided $3.9 billion in climate finance, and the majority of that, or the lion's share, went to the Pacific. But I think the onus is on us with competing priorities to explain the PRF, to explain what it will do, to explain the niche that it's going to sell. And of course, Australia will be engaged on that, and it'll be a key priority for us. But I know it'll be a key priority for leaders right across the Pacific. So we'll need to make that. We'll need to make that case. We're seeking to make it, and that'll be a key focus for us.
Thank you. Well, we have an opportunity for one more, two more. Belle, and then High Commissioner. Last three, and then. So we have Belle, Dr. Kata, and then High Commissioner.
Thank you, George. And thank you, panelists. My name is Bal Kama. I am a principal of legal and strategic advisory firm here in Canberra called Kamana Legal and Advisory. Prior to that, I was the managing lawyer for the Environmental Defenders Office, which has a Pacific program, and I led that program. One of the work that we did was assisting Tuvalu, and I'm glad that Tuvalu is becoming a focus.
It's Tuvalu. For everyone, we need to make sure we know a pronunciation. Tuvalu and Kiribati. So Tuvalu. Yeah.
Tuvalu. Yes. Tuvalu. My apologies. Tuvalu had if I'm Tuvalu, yes. Tuvalu, if you've sort of been in the legal scene, I think they're one of the Pacific states that really took the climate negotiation, climate diplomacy to a next level, at the enforcement level. Something that is missing for many, many years when we leave climate negotiations just as a bilateral instrument or mechanism where governments change, politics change, priority changes, there is no enforcement, there's no accountability. Tuvalu decided that they should step up. And so I would encourage you to look back at the constitutional reform that my team, we supported Tuvalu in 2023, where they're the first state in the world to declare perpetuity of statehood in the face of climate impact. I had a privilege of working with the government there and also traveling and seeing all the sort of the challenge that Philomena has mentioned. The other significant legal development that Pacific championed was last year in October, only 5 months ago. A rundown university in the Pacific, not Harvard, not Yale, USP, no aircon in that place, but they were brilliant minds, passionate students who crafted, engineered, and delivered the world's most significant ICJ judgment, followed by a historic number of countries who have never done that before. They all came on board, over 100 countries. They mobilized the world to deliver a historic judgment at the ICJ. If you had the opportunity to read the submissions by states, including Australia, you could raise some questions around some of the submissions put forward by Australia and other developed states that tend to, one may argue, undermine some of the significant submissions put by the Pacific. So there is question within also that sometimes when there is negotiations, there's another language being spoken, but when it comes to those sort of legal enforcement spaces, depending on who is in government, certain submissions are being put forward. But I want to bring it back to the panel and I guess to the players here, if you are thinking around the COP31, how much of the ICJ decision and the scope of it, mitigation, the adaptation, the need for enforceability, accountability, spelled out at that world's highest court, led by Pacific, delivered by Pacific, for the humanity. How much of that are you planning, or is it playing into your planning, into your preparation for COP31, Australia's effort in the region, also from the PREPS level, how much of that is playing into your negotiations? And players here as well, as we are preparing for COP31, there's a leverage that has taken, sort of went from bilateral relationship to really enforceable mechanism that's being declared by the courts. How much of that are we considering into this COP31 and going forward? Because we don't want to miss out on this opportunity that is really, I think, and many others have agreed on this, have elevated the push for climate justice to a higher level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Val. We have Dr. Kata, Reverend, back here. Yeah, see. No.
Thanks for online. I need to hear you.
Malolile, my name is Ungatea. I am from Tonga. I am from the Tongan community. It is interesting to me that we have to bring countries who pride themselves on looking at evidence to drive their work to actually see what is happening in the Pacific. So it is a bit of a strange thing that we are here at universities where you're supposed to be driven by policy, by evidence. You don't necessarily have to go there to be convinced of but that is telling of itself. One of the things that I want to bring to His Excellency and Philomena, you have said that elevation of ocean-based climate is one of the third pillar of what our leaders have committed to in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago. I want to just say, how does deep sea mining play into that? Because you have countries like Tonga who have gone in to commit themselves into ocean, supporting ocean initiatives, yet at the same time have agreed to be sponsored states for deep sea mining for companies who are based in the United States. So I just want to kind of ask, how then is not just climate, it's not just oceans anymore in climate change, that mining is also an increasing part of those discussions of the importance of climate, of ocean protection for us. Malo Obito.
Well, clear, right? Yes. Well, thank you very much. My name is Samuelu Laloniu, and I'm the High Commissioner of Tuvalu here in Canberra. Not long, July will be my first year in Canberra, so, but let me acknowledge and appreciate the experts panel that we have, and thank you, George, for bringing us together, convening this very valuable discussion in ANU. 3 points. First, it was towards last year that I participate in a panel of climate youth dialogue. Now, it was clear from that discussion, we have youth from the Pacific. It happened right here in yeah, so one of the outcomes from that discussion was that there was a clear need for enhancing the capacity of our youth to participate effectively, impactful participation in the COP process. Now, I think it's not just a matter of including youths in our delegation to these meetings, but to ensure that they are effectively participating, that they are aware and knowledgeable in the institutional arrangement of the UNFCCC process, as well as the political interest behind all the thematic areas of the COP process. I think that's one thing that came out very clearly in that discussion. The second is the upcoming political treaty on sea level rise in the UN. As you know, it's very important. It will be discussing the issue of perpetuity, as referred to, and sovereignty, permanency of maritime boundaries, statehood sovereignty. I want to ask, where does that work? Where does it look like coming the COP in the regional process as we prepare for that very important meeting after the COP in New York? And third is the PRF. I would like to acknowledge that question. I think it was quite important in terms of the resources that we need for the PRF. I'm not fully aware of where PRF right now, but when I was in New York, I was really raising the profile of PRF. And one of the focus was really not just to focus on public funding, but also to look at philanthropy and private sector. I'm not saying that these sectors are immune from the war, the consequences of the war, but maybe you can reflect on that focus if it's still there. Those 3 points. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite all 4 panelists to reflect on all 3 and also for final intervention as well.
Thank you, Ambassador. Some very interesting questions as well. Thank you very much for those questions. Probably I won't be able to respond with adequacy or address your questions adequately, because some of those questions for countries themselves to respond to, in particular the question on deep sea mining, those are sovereign national decisions. Our organization can only provide guidance, for example, on environmental impact assessment to ensure that's undertaken, to look at potential impacts of deep sea mining on the marine environment, for example, and making sure that those things are addressed. But as you said, we're not just talking about climate change impacts, but also looking at, other developments, for example, deep sea mining. The climate-ocean nexus is very important because, as you all know, as islanders, a lot of you in the room are islanders, you come from an island. We've got big oceans, we depend on it as fishers, for domestic sustenance and also for commercial purposes for big countries with big EEZ, for example. Kiribati, right, has the biggest EEZ. And a lot of the national income comes from the fishing license, for example. So it's not just about our day-to-day sustenance, but also commercially, countries are getting that additional revenue in addition to our local taxes, which then help support our national budgets or the national budgets that support the public services across our Pacific Island countries, for example. So, and the important role of ocean in controlling our climate as a carbon sink, for example, to help with reducing the impacts of climate change that is causing what's going on in the world, and in particular what we are facing in the region. And so, and the other thing is, a lot of our traditions, our cultural values, they are linked to the land, to the sea, and to the atmosphere. right? It's important to us as islanders to ensure that that connection between climate change, the climate itself, the impacts of climate change, and how that is affecting our ocean, whether it's, looking from ocean as a source of revenue, as a source of sustenance, of livelihood, or whether you are looking at ocean as a source of ensuring that our cultures, our practices, our identity are maintained going forward. We need to ensure that we have that conversation. We need to ensure that it's being brought to the forefront of the conversations, the negotiations, because we can't, we've been trying over the years, George, to bring oceans to the UNFCCC negotiations. It's not even on the agenda, but because of the advocacy by Pacific Island countries, dialogues have been held as part of the UNFCCC process to look at the ocean and the connection between the ocean and climate change, right? And that's important. The advocacy that Pacific Island countries have done over the years have brought ocean to focus. And hopefully, with the work under COP31, under the leadership of Australia and our Pacific Island countries, more attention will be paid to ocean and why it's important to small island states like Pacific Island countries, for example. The question around the ICJ, last year at COP30, we tried to include language in the Mutarao. It's like a cover decision by the COP president last year. It was so difficult to negotiate to ensure that language from that decision can be included in that. And it's, something that we need to ensure that we look at as we move into COP31, given that one of the key themes for COP31, one of the thematic areas is on that 1.5. And that's important. That's what the ICJ is about, right? The survival of our islands, even though we didn't cause it, we are at the forefront. And it's so important to keep global temperature to 1.5, even below, because look at the impacts now. You just witnessed last week 2 cyclones. 2 cyclones happening at the same time. You count the number of people who were affected, there were casualties as well. Now, we can't continue like this. There has to be something to be done. Ambassador's question around the youth engagement, that's so important. Over the years, we've tried to bring more youth, train them on how to negotiate, how to read the room, understanding climate change, and making sure that the lived experiences on the islands is brought into the negotiation, right? Next month, we'll be doing another training for youth negotiators to ensure that there'll be more youth with that knowledge and that understanding and the skill sets to be able to negotiate. We also have the inaugural, convened the inaugural regional dialogue on loss and damage last year in Apia. Because youth have to be part of the conversations. I mean, they will be the ones facing the brunt of this, of climate change in the future. But they need to be part of that discussion, be part of designing solutions. Because, well, we're not youth anymore, George? But the young ones here in the room, they'll be the ones taking this work forward. And so they need to be part. In terms of the PRF, they are currently, countries have signed up, some of the countries have signed up and ratified the PRF instrument. They already have funding, but they still need to fundraise. And so the pledging event that we're looking to have it as part of the COP31 work, and of course PRF, the Foreign Secretariat and the PRF team themselves, have to look for opportunities to sustain and be able to continue to access financing to finance the PRF. Main reason, one of the key reasons why the PRF was established by our leaders, because a lot of the climate funds requirements cannot be met by NGOs, by civil society, faith-based organization, even community groups in our countries, because of the fiduciary requirements, accreditation requirements that needs to be met. And so PRF was set up to help address that gap. Hopefully I've responded to all your question, Ambassador, sorry if I've forgotten one. But taking the point on the youth. Yes, still are. It's one of the sources. Sorry, Ambassador.
Yeah, so just not too much to add to what Philomena said on the PRF. A lot of advocacy with nation states, and we really welcome, the range of contributions that have been made so far. But very good point, High Commissioner, that the prospects for philanthropic and private sector contributions. So they're within the PRF frameworks that have been set up. There is scope for that, and I know it's something that the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat are looking at very, very closely and having conversations around. And it goes to the broader question of climate finance, and that we won't reach the levels of climate finance that we need globally without private sector contributions and a lot of instruments that the Australian government has to try and sort of de-risk private sector investment to increase total levels of climate finance. On the ICJ decision, so Australia welcomed the handing down of the ICJ advisory opinion. We've commended Vanuatu for their leadership and Pacific Youth for their leadership in taking the initiative forward. Australia was really proud to co-sponsor the UN General Assembly resolution requesting the advisory opinion. In terms of next steps, Vanuatu's working on a follow-up UN General Assembly resolution, and Australia's working constructively with Vanuatu and others on that. In terms of High Commissioner, your point about sea level rise. Of course, Australia with Tuvalu and others have been working on the PIF position on sea level rise. It's been an important focus of us and an important focus of our two countries working together in the broader partnership with the Pacific Islands Forum membership. I think your question was where that fits in with COP31, and I think it's very much in that ocean theme. And I think that, and 1.5 as well, yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, coming back to the pre-COP and the leaders event in Tuvalu, there's a real opportunity to draw attention to those issues and that Pacific Islands Forum position on that issue, and how we give a kind of platform to and encourage broader uptake of that Pacific Islands Forum position. And finally, your point on youth, a really, really good point, High Commissioner, and it gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the ways that Australia is partnering on this amplification of Pacific voices, so youth voices and other important voices for the Pacific. We look forward to announcing pretty soon 3 Pacific climate envoys who will form part of Turkey's COP31 presidency. George, you sort of touched on this, but Australia and New Zealand support each year the Moana Pavilion, which is really a kind of, along with the Australian Pavilion, it's really in lots of ways a kind of core platform for all sorts of amazing, vibrant events, but providing a platform and amplifying Pacific voices. So of course, we should have an extra special Moana Pavilion in Antalya this year, but we'll keep that support going. We work a lot in partnership with SPREP and others on preparing a capacity building for Pacific negotiators and supporting travel and preparation and so on, and that work will be doubly important this year with COP31. Since 2017, Australia's supported the training and attendance of Pacific women climate negotiators in UNFCCC meetings. And we're very pleased to be supporting the Pacific Political Climate Champions Program, again, jointly with New Zealand through the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. So lots of ways that we work with partners, with Pacific youth and more broadly with Pacific governments to build that capability, to partner, to build that capability that's so important that you mentioned, High Commissioner. And I think, you know, just to come back and say thanks to you, George, thanks to all the panel members, and again, just to sort of end on the point that Kasaya made of the real opportunity that we have this year, and the kind of value and importance of that partnership between Australia and the Pacific to maximise that opportunity. So thank you.
I think listening to all those amazing questions, I started trying to map them out in my head, but I guess the key takeaway for me was that everything's interconnected. And so, you know, how do we work together to bring all of these issues to a global multilateral forum at a time when multilateralism is really struggling? How do we do that? It's collaboration, the goal of the theme of this conference, it's partnership. It's, you know, I think something you said, Madam Philomena, really struck me, is that Pacific Island governments have to work and basically like advocate to other governments to take their priorities and amplify their leadership and needs. And it's the same thing with civil society. Civil society is going to our governments to ask them to take these priorities to this world global forum. And I think it's just so important that we just have a real diversity of voices, that COP31 is accessible or made accessible through funding, that it is transparent, that there are ways that many, many different people can bring their knowledge and their expertise and their needs to that platform. So, you know, the Australian government through the envoys or through your role, Ambassador, through other things to really listen to the diverse voices of civil society, and crop agencies play a special role in that, in collating across the region. So really, I think that transparency, that the opportunity for civil society to participate, because when it comes down to it, those negotiations are state-based. And I think one last thing that we all need to remember is that there are places in the Pacific, in Australia, in Aotearoa, where people may not feel represented by their nominated governments, in places where that are still colonized. In the Pacific, for example, 500 nations, First Nations in Australia. So how just being really mindful of making sure that leadership is able to influence the decision. So how does that work when they don't feel represented in that party-state system? And on that note, I'll pass to Sis Barbara on that.
Okay, so Sissy, that's actually a very good segue to my closing comments. The Torres Strait, as an Australian region, sits outside the finance arrangements that we're talking about here. I spoke about structural change before. These are the types of things we need to really look at. We have a mitigation problem. We don't have climate education on ground, on country. We have some infrastructure. People are in trauma now. It's the health and well-being of these people as well as the rising sea levels. We need to get to a space where, if we're going to have a narrative that is Pacific, remember all the canoes. Are they all home? Because we're hanging out over here. The structures that we're operating in, they're colonial constructs. We belong together. And we are hurting and we're not being heard. And we need to be innovative. Like our ancestors from the past, we survive, we are resilient. we build things, we get to places we need to, without fear. This is the moment that we're at that point in our history right now. Existential threat and crisis for some of us. But we're sitting in a space where we're not having access to the family. And this is what I'm trying to impress here. I would like to hope from within this space, whether it's from government, whether it's from the Pacific or us collectively, that we start today bringing the Torres Strait onto the platform that it deserves. We're starting anyway. We're a small, tiny organisation, not for profit, non-government, waiting to establish, but our aspirations meet the crisis that's before us. And so I guess those are my closing comments, and including the part about, Ambassador, the building capacity of young people as well. So George, I think I mentioned to you in the lead up to coming to participate in this, that these sorts of partnerships are really important. This is what we're trying to do with our agency, building pathways for collaboration, relationships. We don't have a huge population. Like I mentioned earlier, we're a microcosm of the Pacific. Absolutely we are. The whole island context, the whole ocean-logged context, we have the sea, same thing. And the whole capacity context. We are light years behind the Pacific. So we're standing to build that and open to relationships, in relationship building and building together, because yeah, if I can leave you with that analogy of the canoes, there are canoes that are missing still. You need to call those home, and you need to fight for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much to everyone. So how we're all interconnected is through the research. There is a research. For the last 10 to 15 years, I've been part of this research that focuses on climate diplomacy. It started from small states and their coalitions from the Pacific. Then it expanded to working with NGOs, working with local community and indigenous people, working with regional organizations, working inside coalitions, working with governments like Australia, working with the EU. It's working at multiple levels, multiple groups within climate change regime. And the work on climate diplomacy finds like we're all interconnected in our relationality, but we're also interconnected in our aspiration. So the research allows us to take students inside COP, allows ourselves to be part of SPRIP, allows ourselves to be part, to go into Saibai, Badu, Baidu, and see for ourselves and work with local communities. The research also connects with NGOs in the Pacific. So 5, 6 years ago, we were asked in terms of how do we improve relationships between Australia and the Pacific on climate change? The answer I gave that day was, why don't you host a COP? But not any particular COP, a COP between Australia and the Pacific together. Why wouldn't it be nice to have something like that? It wasn't aspiration, but based on research that when you go inside these COPs, inside regional forums, inside communities, there's a whole level of cooperation that is in there. And somehow, fast forward, we have a situation where we almost hosted a COP. But before that, we said to ourselves, look at where we are now today. The level of cooperation between our governments, ministers are WhatsApping each other. The level of cooperation between NGOs, private sector, students, and they're not using DFAT money. We're using our own money and our own initiatives. That's part of what coming together at this part of the world, not Australia, not Pacific, but in this part of the world, this is what climate action looks like. And that's been part of this climate diplomacy research, encouraging leaders, encouraging officials, encouraging policymakers, encouraging local community, that we can do this together, irrespective of the politics, irrespective of the geopolitics, and irrespective of amount of funding that we have. But that's been this climate action in this part of the world, not Pacific, not Australia, maybe we call it Oceania, but we say it in our part of the world, where we have one climate system, where our decisions has a consequence on the Pacific, and what the Pacific does and decides has a consequence on Australia. That's been part of this research on climate diplomacy. And everything that you also have said are all interwoven in the climate regime. But to the question of seabed mining, our community, 2 weeks ago, we were in Fiji, where communities where they're going to open up mines are asking, why do we have to pay for the renewable energy through digging through our soils? So the question of mining is about climate change. It's about how do we give the world our critical minerals in our seabed and within our lands. So it's a question that we also have to face front. The topic, the theme, the proverb which Fiamea shared with us, mativa whapsangai, face to face in times of adversity, face to face in times of crisis. This is not the time to, that all canoes should be there. We all need to see face to face. Government, local community, Australia, within the highlands of Papua New Guinea. This is the time that's about us face to face through communal solidarity, communal respect, and communal action. Hopefully, this wonderful panel who have shared their time, but also traveling all the way through here to Canberra, inspires more research, more researchers, but also that we also have a COP31 this year. For the strategists in us, when India pulled out of COP33, I think all WhatsApp messages like, is this the Asia-Pacific time for the Pacific? We don't know, but look out for that space. But I hope you all enjoy. Thank you very much. We do have lunch that's prepared for us, but I'd now like to hand back to Naomi for any final instructions. And thank you again.
Testing. Thank you all. I know lunch is ready, so I don't want to be between you and your lunch. So as host, thank you very much, Salā, and panelists, for your wonderful work in the region and for the wonderful insights that you've shared with us. Thank you, audience, for your questions. It is my prayer that all the strands will come together, we'll all weave together a very strong basket as we prepare for pre-COP31 in Fiji, and of course the leaders component in Tuvalu. I've been trying to summarize this whole session. A lot has been said, but I tried to summarize it in 2 sentences. Climate change is a real lived reality. We live it and we breathe it. 1.5 degrees Celsius. The fight is still on together. Whakawhataelahe.